This is the Amazing Education Podcast. Powered by the Ames Community School District, I'm your host, Eric Smith. On today's episode, we are joined by Kristin Lewis, Associate Principal at OPN Architects. We're going to have an amazing conversation on what it takes to design a large high school from concept to completion. Kristin Lewis, thank you for being on this episode of the Amazing Education Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So this has been a long gestating episode here. We actually had this episode scheduled in March of 2020. So, a year and a half ago, we were planning, more than that, we were planning on doing this and everything got derailed, but yet here we are. We're going to talk about our high school construction project, but even more specifically, you work for OPN, an architectural firm who has taken the lead on designing and then ultimately helping implement this project. And I'm going to tell you, from the moment that we started this project, I've been completely fascinated with your work and the work that OPN as a firm has done on this. So, God, this is exciting.
It is. It's been a great project. A lot of fun.
And now we're getting to the point where it's like, geez, we're almost done with this. But we're going to go back a little bit, and we're going to talk about sort of the origins of this project. And you've been with us, working with us on this project from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yep, since 2018.
So this is a $137 million high school project. How do you even start that?
Sort of like eating an elephant, right? You gotta just start bit by bit.
Yeah.
So our work started in 2018, just after passing the bond referendum. You really just start to gather the key stakeholders, and I think we first started off by listening. That's kind of the primary first step. You got to listen. You got to hear, what are the needs of the district? What are folks looking for in a new high school? Both teachers and students and administrators, but also the community, because this is something that's supported well by the community, and they must have a voice in it as well.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of different listening sessions. I know people probably remember that, us being stationed at the high school and at the middle school, and then having some follow-up meetings as well. We just start by listening.
So I do remember part of this. So I have some visual aids, and I'll also be able to share these on our YouTube channel as well during the episode. But so this was an example of a listening opportunity. So in our boardroom, I'll describe the picture, there's just a lot of printouts, conceptual printouts of other high schools. And I remember going through this as far as, this is what I like, this is really neat, this is really cool. What are some things that you are listening for in this process?
Sure. So everybody comes to the table with a different perspective on what warm, inviting, trendy, or not trendy means.
Yeah.
So we like to put all these photos on the wall of a variety of different kinds of looking architecture, things that maybe are real modern, or something that's more industrial, or something that's more traditional. And we like people to go up and just write on the page, circle this, I love these windows, or gosh, I hate that chair, I hate that color, and we start to kind of to find some common thread in there, and that begins to form the base of where we start.
Is the common thread the key to that? Because ultimately, you work in this world, so you're very knowledgeable. I mean, that is your profession, but you also know, and I know this too, like, you are presenting to people who don't live in that world. And so, sometimes when it comes to art and creative things, and I'm going to be honest with you, I feel like the work that you guys have done at OPN, it is art. I mean, it's built with steel and, has wires running through it. But I mean, it is art. But you're talking to people that it may be more difficult for them to articulate what they like, but they do know what they like. I mean, I know when I look at this stuff, it's like, oh, I really gravitate towards this picture or that concept more than others. So
Yeah.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we start to see some consensus. It's really amazing when you do these types of exercises. You'll generally start to see how you get a feel for where people are at, what they prefer and not prefer. And oftentimes it does mirror a little bit about the architecture of your community and your area.
Sure.
So you start to see some themes that are consistent as well.
Oh, that's interesting. So I'm going to throw up another picture here. This was you meeting with one of our high school departments. This was our science department. So how does the conversation start with this particular group? Because this isn't broad anymore. This is a little more narrowed as far as what this high school department would prefer. So what are you talking about? What are you listening for?
So this was, I think, our first meeting that we had in the series of department meetings. We had the same images on the wall, so we started in the same place with that group as we did with the school board, and kind of learned kind of where people's aesthetic preferences were. And then we started to sit down around the table and talk about spaces. What kinds of classrooms do they need? How many teachers are there? How many, what kinds of classes are they teaching? And then after, what's not shown in this picture is the tour that we took of their existing classroom space.
Oh, okay.
And they walked us through, how do they operate today?
Yeah.
What works? What doesn't work? And we learned quite a bit from that. So we took all of that information back, made refinements to it, and then came and met with them again, and I think maybe even another time after that to make sure that we were on the right track.
And this is all before we're even considering breaking ground on this project.
Yeah, this meeting was taking place probably in the summer of 2018.
Okay. Yeah. So for us as a district specifically, we knew where we were going to build. One of the neat takeaways that I've had going through this project is really anything is possible. When I always talk with our director of facilities, we talk about on a small scale, well, can we do this to this building? And his response is, we can do anything. Taking down a wall is not a big deal to those who are equipped to take down said wall. So we knew where we were going to build the new building. But the interesting part, and just listening to you speak about it before, is the different capacities that OPN has. So you can't just build a building of this size on land. You have to make sure it can hold a building of this size. And what are some other considerations that happen even before we break ground? I mean, and we're going to get into some other pictures here as well.
Yeah. First, we had those initial meetings to figure out how big, what is the overall size of this building, and then budget, is of course another constraint on the project. So, what can we afford to build? That begins to dictate the size of the building on the site.
Yeah.
And then our site constraint, it being right next to the high school, we did have some pretty limiting site constraints. So that really affected how tall it could be. So we knew we weren't going to build a one-story building because it wouldn't all fit. So we had to start to build up. So those are some things that we were thinking about early on as we were listening and hearing all of the different needs and wants from those in the district.
We're going to page through a couple of other of these pictures. So we knew the site that we were going to be in, and this was a building block exercise. So we have a couple pictures here. Talk me through the concept of what does this do for you, or how does it advise you moving forward?
This turned out to be a really great tool, and I will say we don't do this on every project, but this one, it was a great way for us to get on the same page about the basic program blocks and where they wanted to be in relationship to the other. And oftentimes we as architects, because we hold the pencil, we are the ones who are sort of coming up with those ideas. And what we found was it wasn't quite meeting the mark. It wasn't quite getting us there. So we created these blocks so that we could work with the district folks, and together, they could pick them up and move them around, and we could pick them up and move them around and have a conversation over a table, rather than us trying to hear and document and then come back. So these were really this was a really fun exercise, trying to think of different ways that we could lay the building out. Which, athletics is probably the red. Where does that going to go? Right. Where does the auditorium want to go? And how do those work together? How about classrooms? Where do the classrooms need to go in order to fit into this mix? And I think after this meeting, we really began to kind of realize what the overall general kind of layout of the building would be.
And due to the size of this particular building, it's it's one building, but in many ways it's kind of blocked in smaller buildings. I mean, the gymnasium by itself is a big building.
Right.
You know, the auditorium by itself is a big building. The academic wing is a big building. And so I found this to be really cool.
Yeah.
So, you know, the show continues. We figure out the layout, you know, and now describe to me just the overall process. You know, we're looking at this 30,000 foot level, and we continue to come down from that and get more specific. So here we got there, and I'll just throw another picture up here. We've decided on the general layout. And now you're in front of more people talking. What are we doing here?
This was really an update meeting for the community, because I think at this point it had been quite a while since we had last met with the community. This was, I believe, towards the end of design development, which is a phase for us where we've really started to figure out where all of the little parts and pieces are, but we're having that one kind of final review with everybody, make sure that we're still on the right track. And at this point, I believe we were also layering some information about how the building would be constructed, because of the tight site and it being located right next to the high school and right in the parking lot of the old high school, we had to think about how that would impact the community and how it would impact the design potentially, so that we would make sure that we could accommodate everyone.
So this first year, there are a lot of phases, and so I'm going to throw out some of those phases, and I want you to walk me through some of them. So we know we're moving forward. That was the bond that you referenced. We go into schematic design. We go into design development that you just talked about, and then we go into construction documents. So my understanding is that through every phase, we're getting a greater amount of detail. But, you know, what is schematic design? What is design development? What are those intended to do?
Yeah, I like to describe our design process as a funnel. So we start at the top at the big part of the funnel. We're taking a lot of really big parts and pieces and looking at how they lay out together. So thinking back to the image with the big kind of, we call them Jello cubes, but the big sort of blocks. And in schematic design, we're really figuring out how do those big blocks fit together? What's the best way to lay them out? Because as you know, and I described it as like eating an elephant. You have to start, and kind of figure out how you work kind of down the funnel. So start with those big blocks, figure out generally how it's all going to lay out. By the end of schematic design, you've sort of figured that out. You've also started to think about maybe what the exterior might look like in a more conceptual sense, not figuring out all the little parts and pieces, but just an overall look and feel. And then when we get into design development, that's really where we start to make refinements. We go back to the programming document, make sure that spaces are going to fit, that we have the right sizes, that we have the right proportions of all of those spaces, and kind of, again, working down that funnel, working toward a greater level of detail as we get to the bottom of the funnel. And the bottom of the funnel is construction documents, and that for us is a heads down time where we've figured out exactly how the building's laying out, we figured out how many doors we need, and we've figured out how many cabinets we need. And in that phase, we are really doing all the detailing and the communication that we need to provide to the contractors for them to be able to build it and put bids on it as well. So that's really the very detailed part of the process where we're trying to just get it all on paper.
I feel like I have this desire to go back to the first question in, oh my goodness, like just how do you start this project? I mean, there's so many things to it. Do you just lean into the process knowing that you don't need to know the answer that will come out 10 months from now because you have all of these systems and processes in place that will lead you to that point?
Yep. You just have to start at the top. You have to think the big picture, kind of keep that in mind, and then keep working towards a greater level of detail, knowing that you'll get there. Yeah. And that's what the training that we have as architects helps us to understand, is that we start big and then kind of work towards the final solution. And, it's nice to know that door needs a card reader, at the beginning of the project, but, that's not important at that moment. At that moment, we're trying to make sure we've got, the right kinds of spaces, the right the right functionality.
So talk me through your team. Just before we started recording, you said that during some of these phases, you had upwards of 15 people working on this project. So what are all those people doing?
Okay, so our team was quite large. So the OPN team, during construction documents, when we're doing all the drawing and documenting of the project, we probably had about 15 people in our office that were working on it. And we use just a very simple structure where we've got project managers who oversee the staff. For this project, because of its size, we broke the building into, I think we had 3 different teams. We had an athletics team who were just focused on pretty much the south end of the building and doing all the documenting of that part of the building. And then we had the educational or academic kind of north half of the building. That team worked on like the CTE areas and all of the classroom pods. And then we had another team for the music and theater because those are more specialized.
Yep.
And oftentimes these teams were working with different consultant teams as well, because while we have the OPN team, we're all just architects and interior designers.
Yeah.
The full design team was made up of, we had design engineers for MEP, for designing all the electrical, plumbing, mechanical systems.
Okay.
They had a huge team on this.
Yeah.
We had a civil engineer, Snyder and Associates. They had a team working on the exterior. We had some other consultants who are more dedicated. So we had a consultant just to help design the pool. We're not experts in pools.
Yeah, sure.
So we brought in somebody who is.
Yeah.
The same thing for the theater. We had theater and music rooms. We had an acoustician to help us confirm we had the right sort of room acoustics for both the theater and the music classrooms too. So the team gets pretty big as you layer in all of these experts who have knowledge within a certain field.
So with construction documents done, at that point, does the project, does it get locked, or is there ever a point where it gets locked, or is it you shook your head no?
No. So when we finish construction documents, we put the project out for bid.
Okay.
And so that's the point where we begin to step back a little bit, and the contractor takes a much more leading role in the project. And even during construction, we're going to find things that either maybe we need to go back and think about differently because something's changed, like COVID, for instance, maybe could affect something, or just, maybe some different departments or new hires. So there's certainly some fluidity of the design as it goes into construction, but the further you get in construction, the harder it is to change. So we like to try to identify all that as early as possible, and if possible.
So this was a graphic that I shared out with our community just to give them a sense. This isn't a project that gets put up over the summer, where it takes 3 years to build a building of this size, and so we planned it into phases. What was your involvement in the phases, or does some of this lean more heavily into the construction management firm?
A lot of this was developed by Story, the construction management firm. We played a role in helping to confirm how this would be done. And in some cases, it affected our design a bit, like making sure we could get the parking online. That some of that stuff had to go ahead of the schedule for the school, and also this summer will be a pretty big summer for all the utility work that will happen between the 2 buildings. So making sure that we had the design solid for those utilities, and also making sure the building left us enough room to put those utilities in was something that we had to think about during the design phase.
So once we get into construction, what is your role and OPN's role working with, in our case, Story Construction, but the construction management, they're the experts in actual the building of it, but it doesn't mean that you are off the project by any means. So what is your firm's involvement during the 3-year construction? What is your focus?
So our firm, we don't just hand the drawings over and let the contractor go build it. There's a lot. We're still operating as a team. So we're taking more of a secondary role during construction and story, and the construction manager is taking kind of that primary point role. But we're still up, each week for site visits. We're answering any questions that the contractors may have, on the drawings. If something's not working right, we're in the middle of it trying to figure out maybe a better solution for how to do it. We also have to review what we call submittals. So the contractors send us the products and different kinds of pieces that they're going to provide for the project, and we have to say, yep, that meets what we were expecting. So we're involved in kind of just a double check to make sure what's going into the building is what we had planned in the design documents.
And now, as we approach really the end, we have several months to go yet, but we're getting to the end. I know that you're going to be involved in a meeting around signage. So what does that look like? Just because that's, I know, timely in your schedule right now.
Yep. So we're finishing out all those last parts and pieces. With a 3-year construction window, we didn't want to, finalize the signage design 3 years ago.
Yeah,
of
right.
course,
yeah.
Things have changed. So now we're coming back to that, and we're making sure we have those things ready to go, because we have to have the signage in the building before the building opens.
Right.
So we're kind of coming back and doing all those things. The team's also starting actually doing punch lists, which are where we walk through and make sure the building, mark any paint touch-ups or dings or things that aren't correct in the construction project.
I referenced it earlier, and I truly mean it, because I've been fascinated with the entire process, in that I truly do believe building a building of this size, it's an art form. And I hope you take that as a compliment, because it truly is. But the interesting part of it for me is that it's an art form that also must align with code. It's an art piece that people, will walk through and live in. Our students and our staff will be living in this building, hours throughout the day, every single day. And especially at a high school, there's not a lot of downtime in that high school. it operates early in the morning and it closes late at night. And there's just a lot to work through.
Yeah.
What's the most? What's your favorite part of it? Is there a favorite part of the project, of the process? Is there a particular area that you really get excited for?
That's tough. I feel like the whole thing is kind of like...
They're all your babies here, I know.
There are so many, I think, transformative things in this building that I hope the students and faculty and everyone are really excited about when they walk through for the first time.
Yeah.
I think we've done a good job of looking back at our goals and objectives that we set out at the beginning of the project, providing something that's welcoming, something that feels safe, something that has a lot of natural light and views. So I hope that when people walk through, they feel that and can feel that in the building. My favorite part of a process is actually the beginning, where we start to get the idea of what this thing's going to look like.
Yeah.
And then I love coming back at the end and seeing people walk through it and say, wow, I just love all the natural light here. I just you hear them say the things that we were really hoping to hear.
There is something about having a blank canvas where anything is possible, and then to be able to see it to the end is pretty valuable. I do remember having those conversations around natural light being really important, where our academic pods were located, like what they looked over was really important, because that sets a tone and it sets a mood in the schools, in the classrooms. And so that was really important, for them to look over something that was, dark or not having a lot of windows. Like, that doesn't help.
It's a school of the future.
It is.
Natural
It absolutely is.
Yes.
Well, I've heard this project being described as, it's going to be the envy of, a lot of community colleges, even, not just high schools. It's going to be an amazing high school, and I assume that you will be there for whatever our grand opening looks like, and I don't know, you'll probably be invited to help lead some tours as well. You probably know more about this project than almost anyone.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the end here.
All right, well, I think I've kept you long enough. It's time to get back to work, Kristin, because
Better get back over to site.
I know, as you said, that deadline is now, looming, and so, but this is really exciting. So, Kristin, I wanted to thank you for being part of this episode of the Amazing Education Podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.